Also, Master Sven, please remind me not to end the Zoom meeting and to just end the recording, or else we will be in trouble because Anastasia is not here to save us. This is what you want to teach Belgoth. Little credentials on why I can teach this class. I am a licensed elementary school teacher in the state of Idaho. That's the main one. I've only been teaching officially for 1 year now, which means I have all the academic knowledge on how to teach and not as much practical knowledge as I would like. But each teaching good lesson has a method it follows and a set of instructions that it follows to make sure your students learn. So I designed this class with student participation because that's part of being a good teacher. If you guys don't say anything, I suppose that's fine, but it makes my half a lot less exciting. So I'm going to begin with asking a couple questions. What was a time you were asked to teach? And how did it go? And how do you know? So if you want to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Again, I can't see the chat, but the other contestants would be able to. Participants, not contestants. And I'll wait a few seconds, and if no one chimes in, I'll move on. Okay. So we're asked to teach a lot in Bell, whether we are peers or just the random person who is at practice. A super common time when we're teaching someone is when we're explaining the rules. And people don't think of that as a concept of teaching, but it really is. You have to be able to effectively communicate the rule set that we follow and use when we're playing this game. The second way, we're also asked to teach. If you're an artisan, people ask you to show how to do your craft and your skill. If you are a fighter, then they might ask you, hey, can you give me some tips about how to fight with this weapon, or how to block this shot people keep hitting me with, or how, people keep saying I'm hitting light. Can you tell me how to have more power generation? And we're informally teaching anytime, super common in Bell. And then we're formally teaching. So at events, we'll have classes where instructors will come and present, or some realms will have classes that the host, or for new fighters or for beginner fighters. So there's a ton of times when you find yourself in the position of a teacher, whether officially in title or unofficially just in action. And there are some things you can do, some steps you can follow to help make sure that your lesson that you're teaching is more effective, whether it's an official lesson that you've planned out or just something you're showing them how to do. So I'm going to be talking about the format that my university taught me when I was going through my teacher credential program, and its official title is the Direct Instruction Plan. And here, this little image right here does a great job of showing a quick overview. I will be using a slightly different vocabulary than this image. But as you can see, it has the beginning of your lesson is almost all the teacher. And I call this the input section. So the teacher is talking, the teacher is the one doing it. It's got very little students doing. Students are listening at this point. The second lesson, they call it guided instruction. I call this one modeling at this point. So this is when the teacher is showing the students how to do it. Sometimes there's more student involvement. Maybe they bring a student up, but it's mostly teacher work here. And then we have the guided practice. I put it down here. And this is where the students are doing it and the teacher is right next to them. And lastly, we have independent practice where the student is doing it by themselves and the teacher may or may not be present. They're pretty hands-off at this stage. So I also add in another section called purpose, which is on my next slide. The purpose should be the first thing you tell your student when you begin teaching them. It answers the question, why do I care? Why do I need to learn this thing? Students through kindergarten, through college and beyond want to know why they care. This is why historically grammar or math have such, you have to get that engagement because they don't see how it's applicable to their everyday life. So if you can answer them that question, why do I care? Your student engagement will automatically increase, and the amount that they will remember of your lesson also increases. I'm taking a master's class right now that's talking about the brain and memory, and the brain remembers what makes sense and has meaning to you. So something can make sense but have no meaning. 2 plus 2 can equal 4. That can make sense in your brain, but if I said 2 Skittles are given to you and you already had 2 Skittles, how many Skittles do you have now? That has so much more meaning, at least to my 6-year-olds it does, than arbitrary numbers, and they are more likely to remember how that works. So in Bell, the 2 examples I have here is I'm going to teach you the rules. Why? So you can play the game and be safe. That one's pretty intuitive to anyone who's learning the rules. Everybody understands why you teach rules, but maybe someone doesn't understand why you're trying to teach them good power generation. So this why, for my second example, I'm going to teach you how to generate power safely so you don't hurt yourself long term. Especially if you're a new fighter, you may not realize how many of our veteran and long-term fighters have permanent injuries because of improper mechanics that they used for years when they were younger, and even fixing them currently still has long-lasting damage on the body. So that answers the why, and it gives meaning and helps reinforce memory. So next is the input, the I do part. This is the teacher is talking. We are telling information to the students. Students are listening at this point. Students should not be passively listening. You should encourage an active listening. So that means, that might mean on your end, stopping and asking questions and making sure the students are understanding what you're saying. But it is teacher talk. So the example I have is there are 2 ways to die. If you're giving the rules, you can get hit in the torso or you can lose 2 limbs. Or another example would be to generate proper power, you need to throw with your whole body, not just your arms. Input is very much teacher talk, and it oftentimes, especially in Bell, if you're doing a fighting, quick teaching moment in fighting, it'll bleed into the next section, which is modeling, which is the teacher doing it for you, or the teacher showing you how. So the example for the rules would be the teacher would hit someone in the torso and 2 limbs to show that that would be death. And they would demonstrate both of those ways. Or for the second example, it might be demonstrating how to show the proper shot. A lot of times in Bell, we see both of these being blended together in one moment. So the teacher would say, those 2 ways to die, getting hit in the torso, and then they would physically hit someone in the torso at that moment, or getting hit in 2 limbs and physically hitting someone in 2 different limbs at that moment. That's completely fine. As long as you're both saying it and showing it, it doesn't matter if it happens, first and then second, or if it's happening at the same time, but you do need to have both saying and showing for it to be effective. People are multi-sensory learners. So when you say and show, you are activating 2 different senses in the body, the visual sense and the auditory sense. And I can go on a mini rant about things I'm learning in my class about how the brain learns, but just know the more senses you activate, the better it is. And we'll get to the next sense, which is your kinesthetic sense, learning by doing in guided practice. Guided practice, in my opinion, is the most important step in this process, and also the one teachers will skip the most. I know even in my classroom as an elementary teacher, I will see the clock running out and I'm like, oh no, I need to finish quickly. And I'll be tempted to skip this step. And every single time I ever do that, I end up using and wasting more time because my students don't know how to do it the way I thought they would. I didn't check for enough understanding before releasing them to independent practice. So don't skip guided practice. Guided practice is when the student is doing the thing and the teacher is watching. So the teacher is still there. They have not walked away. They are actively engaged in what the student is doing and making sure the student is doing it correctly. This is the time for the teacher to correct mistakes. So an example for if you're teaching the new rules, this would be when you would have the new fighter show you the different areas where if they get hit, it would be death. So they could hit you with a weapon, they could hit one of their friends with a weapon, but you're making sure that they truly do understand which areas mean death when they hit someone. If it would be our power generation example, it would be the student showing you how they would move their body to generate better power. You don't just tell them how and show them how and then expect them to be able to do it perfectly on their own. You tell them how, you show them how, and then you watch them do it so that you can give any correction that needs to happen. Again, this is the most important part because what happens if you skip this is you move into independent practice, which is where the student is doing it without the teacher. And they're doing it either independently by themselves or they might be doing it with other students. And what happens here if you misguided practice is the student has misconceptions or they didn't fully understand something you said in input or in modeling, and they are practicing it incorrectly. And there's a saying that practice makes permanent, not perfect. So if a student is practicing something incorrectly, they are, I'm going to go into fancy brain things right now. They are building those pathways, those neuron pathways in their brain. And every time they practice it incorrectly, that pathway they're building is getting stronger and stronger. So what that means is you as a teacher are going to come back around at some point and you're going to go, oh no, why are you doing it that way? That's the wrong, weren't you listening? Well, the answer is yes, they were probably listening, but you didn't check to make sure they fully understood. You skipped the guided practice where you would have watched them do it incorrectly and been able to immediately correct them and say, actually, this is how you do it. And then the pathway during the independent practice would be building the correct path between the neurons to show how to accurately perform the task involved rather than inaccurately. So don't skip guided practice. It's so important for every little thing. I do it for how to cut things with my 6-year-olds. Like, it's extremely important. Yeah, it's guided practice is student doing it while teacher is watching. It's the time for teacher to correct mistakes. Independent practice is student doing it without teacher. So the biggest example here would be the new fighter going onto the field at this point. So you as a teacher are now no longer right by their side watching them. They are off on the big field fighting all by themselves. The thing a lot of times we see happening here is just in Bell, I'm going to deviate for a moment. We'll have people do modeling and input for the rules. they skip guided practice and they throw the student onto the fighting field, brand new fighter, first practice on the fighting field, and they feel completely overwhelmed and lost. It's my personal opinion as a realm leader, um, that you should do a mini guided practice for students before throwing them onto independent practice after you have gone through all the rules. And I think that this should look like either a fighter going off to the side and fighting with the new fighter, or if there's a group of new fighters, you pull them off to the side and have them fight with each other while a more experienced Belgrim is watching over and just making sure they fully understand all the rules and are comprehending how to fight. It's it makes this transition to the fighting field a lot easier. So, highly recommend you just have your fighters do a few rounds off on the side of the field, which serves as the guided practice when you're introducing new rules, then just throwing them immediately into the main fighting field where they have veteran fighters who are so much more experienced than them and they just feel completely lost and overwhelmed. I would say the main exception to this would be at promotional events, such as Renaissance fairs, where 90% of your field is new fighters. You don't necessarily have to run a mini guided practice in that situation because they'll be fighting with people at their level. And the goal of them is to get people having fun as quickly as possible. Um, and then the example for the power generation would be the student going off in a fight, either one-on-one or on the field, and actively using the power generation techniques that you have taught them and they have practiced. So, I said this last point that independent practice can be a gradual release from one-on-one to field fighting, or for crafting can be a gradual release from a lot of teacher watching to no teacher watching at all, or anything along there. Tips and tricks: keep your lesson focused. If you are teaching a brand new fighter, you don't want to go over how to generate power and how to hand block and how they should be holding their shield and what their footwork should look like all at once. That's way too much in the brain because they're also still trying to remember the rules for the game. And your working memory can only hold about 5 to 7 pieces of information. An adult brain can only hold 5 to 7 pieces of information at a time. So, and each new concept has a lot of tiny pieces of information. So keep it really to the point whenever you're teaching something new. Narrow in on the one thing you're teaching. So if I'm teaching a new fighter, the primary thing I'm going to focus with them on is understanding the rules. I'm not going to talk to them necessarily about using the shield or proper ways to hand block. I'm going to make sure they understand what a hand block is. I'm going to make sure they understand where is the line between arm and torso, and when are they calling death there. I'm going to make sure they understand that line between hip and leg, and when that becomes death, and when it's just a limb. My goal is just, do you understand the rules? Because the rules already have like probably 10 different sections, which is more than your working brain can actually hold at a time. If I'm teaching a more experienced person who has the rules automatically down, then I might be like, okay, now let's talk about shield movement. Now we have this one thing we're going to focus on, and that's how you block with your shield and how you hold your shield. And we're not going to think about power generation or footwork, we're going to think about shield. And once you have that down, we'll add on something else. If it's crafting, I'm not going to teach you how to sew a eyelet in, and also how to put in a facing, and also how to do satin stitch, and also how to make a pretty French seam on your very first project. I'm going to start with one thing, and we're going to learn that one thing, which is probably how to backstitch and have good seam allowance, is my beginning sewing thing I'm going to teach. So really keep it focused. Those brain research on why you need to keep it focused, but just remember the brain can only hold so much. So if you want them to remember anything, narrow it down to that one or two things you want them to remember. The next thing is check for understanding. That's a teacher term, but I think it translates fairly well to layman term. Checking for understanding is just when you're asking your student questions and having them respond in some way to make sure they fully comprehend what you're saying. So back here, if I'm at input, my check for understanding might be a verbal question going, what are the 2 ways you can die? And have the student verbally say to me, I can get hit in the torso or I can lose 2 limbs. At modeling, I might say, point to the 2 sections, 2 ways that you can die, or indicate on your body the 2 different ways you can die. And I would have the student indicate with their hands, I can get hit in the torso or I can lose 2 limbs. Guided practice, checking for understanding, I might say something along the lines of, how many limbs does it take for you to die? Or, oh man, did that hit you? Where did it hit you? What does that mean? Prompting them to think through it hit me in my torso, so I'm dead, so I need to say I'm dead and lay on the ground. It can be having the student show you how to do it, and just make sure it's paying attention to your student's body language and facial expressions. If they start glossing over or losing disinterest, it probably means their understanding is falling down and they're not fully comprehending what you're saying anymore, because the brain latches onto what makes sense. So if they're not making sense of what you're saying, they're going to disengage and lose interest. So that's the time to pause and check and see where you're losing them and back up if you need to. People won't always learn with just one lesson. So you might explain to them the rules one day, and then they're going to come back the next week and they're going to forget where that line was between death and limb. That's okay, especially if they're a new fighter. They got like 10 other thousand things to think about with the game, plus all the things happening on the field at that moment. So just be patient with them. Show them again, tell them again patiently. The worst thing you can do if you were thinking about recruitment and retainment, the easiest way to lose a member is for someone seen as a teacher to yell at them and to make them feel small. So don't do that. Be kind to your students, especially since this is a free sport it's optional. No one's making them be here. And then this last one is just a pet peeve of mine, and thankfully it's gone down since the time I joined Bell. But when I first joined Bell, I definitely heard people saying, I'll hit them until they learn to block. That's my way of teaching. I'm just going to say that's not teaching. If your goal is to win the fight, that's fine. That's fine. Hit them until they learn to block if your goal is to win the fight. If your goal is to teach them, that is the most ineffective method I have ever seen. And instead of hitting them until they learn to block it, you should stop and tell them how to block it and show them how to block it and have them show you how to block it and then have them go and practice blocking it on the field, because that's how you teach. That's a pet peeve of mine, is when people say that. So in review, I'm just going to go back to that second screen where we have this overview of the direct instruction plan. Well, it starts with input. It's the teacher doing it, student listening, modeling of teacher showing it, student watching, guided practice of student doing it, teacher watching and correcting any mistakes, very important. And independent practice where the student is doing it themselves and the teacher may or may not even be present at this point. So that is my PowerPoint presentation. If anyone has questions or comments about times when they've taught or questions about the direct instruction, I will say there are other teaching models because there's a whole lot of different teaching models, but you'll find a lot of them will follow to some extent those 4 steps of input, modeling, guided practice, and independent practice. And you'll see those followed in a lot of different teaching models. The direct instruction is just what my university called this specific model. So if anyone has teaching stories they want to share, they can do that. Questions about what they should do in a certain teaching situation or about the model itself.
Yeah, I actually have a question. So how long would you say you spend on the teaching the rules aspect, and then how long would you say you spend on the modeling?
Okay. Good question. So I would say part of that depends on the context of what you're teaching. So again, if it's a promotional event like a Renaissance fair, my goal is to be 5 minutes and less in the rules and get them out on the field having fun. Because again, a Renaissance fair is 90 to 95% just Renaissance fair attendees on the field. And we do a super, my realm at least will do a super simplified version of the rules. It was like 2 limbs, you're dead, body shot, you're dead, no headshots. And we send them off onto the field with basically just that. If someone has come up to my practice, I have about, it's probably 5 to 7 minute spiel that I have down for the rules, and I just walk them through all of those rules at once, and then I pull them off to the side of the field, and I'll watch them until I'm pretty sure that they're comfortable with all of the rules before I put them on. So if I'm the one fighting them, I will intentionally do a variety of hits on them to see if they know how to take it. So I'll make sure I hit them in the shoulder to see if they know how to take that as a death shot. I'll hit them in, the main torso area to make sure they can take that as death. I'll hit them in 2 legs, a leg and an arm and a leg, 2 arms, all the combinations. I'll intentionally hit them in the hand to make sure they know how to call out hand when they get hit there. So a lot of it is just intentionally watching and making sure they're understanding. Most of the time for my practice, my guided practice will go for about 10 minutes, and then I'll invite them onto the main field if they want. And I will usually join them on that main field and fight alongside with them just to kind of give them that security of, I'm not here all by myself, and someone who knows what they're doing is with me and can help me. That's not always an option. It also depends in the bell context, it depends on the age of your new fighter. So if I have, someone who just barely meets the age limit, my realm allows people who are 12 and older to fight as long as there's a parent present. So if it's that younger age limit, I'll spend more time both on the rules and in the modeling and guided practice section, just to make sure that's really solid and they fully understand. If it's someone who's a full-grown adult and they're, demonstrating to me that they have a pretty good comprehension, I'll speed it up a little bit and push them into the main field.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And then I'm welcome to stay on if anyone wants to shoot any questions my way. I know Master Sven, who's also on, is also a professional teacher, so he can put his 2 cents in if I don't know the answer. And in 29 minutes, I have my Satin Stitch Applique class. So you guys are either welcome to stay. This Zoom link is going to stay up all day. So I'm not actually going to end the meeting at all. So you guys are welcome to either stay on and continue asking me questions about teaching or anything else you want to in life, or leave.
I've got a quick question for you. Do you have any tips on establishing a shared vocabulary quickly?
Between who?
That's kind of just as a general question. And I've done a little teaching myself. I taught chemistry lab in college. And then we would occasionally do, like, for National Chemistry Week, we'd do demonstrations for elementary classrooms. And going from like teaching a lab to an elementary classroom, I was very fortunate that one of the teachers was like, "You're not doing a very good at sharing vocabulary here," and like encouraging me to back up.
Sweet. I understand. Yeah, so I am an elementary school teacher. I teach 4th grade. And vocabulary is something you have to be super intentional about. It's one of the, if you don't mind, I'm going to go into a small little reading rant before I actually answer your question. In reading, to be a fluent reader, we have the big 5, which is fluency, phonemic awareness, comprehension, something else, phonics, and vocabulary. So it's considered one of our big 5 in being a good reader, and it should be intentionally taught throughout all grades. The easiest way, I have whole books on teaching vocabulary and vocabulary strategies. I can get excited about this, but the biggest way is to find a connection point and then to come up with something that can help the students comprehend. So if I'm taking a higher level chemistry concept and I'm trying to teach my students that meaning at an elementary level, I need to find something tactile or visual that they can latch onto. So can you throw me a chemistry vocab you might be using?
The model we followed was very close to that. So sorry, I'm drawing a blank right now.
No, you're fine. Because I'm trying to think. Like if
think
I'm
like polymers, plastics, where you start to get big networks of chemicals kind of webbing together to create a stronger material.
Oh, cool. In that case, what I probably would do would be, and I don't know a ton about polymers, but that your phrase about webbing together to make it stronger, I would probably bring in string or yarn or something and braid it together to show them how when different things are being joined, it's now stronger than when it was by itself. And depending how much time you have and how important this vocabulary is, which you probably don't have this much time, but I would give each student or group my students into small groups and have them actually braid it out so that they can tactilely see how much stronger it is, and then label that as the polymer so that they know, oh, a polymer is something that's been braided and is stronger. You can also bring in those physical examples of everyday objects that would have polymer in them so that they can connect it to stuff at home. I'm trying to think, like acids are ones that a lot of elementary kids already have a pretty strong understanding of what an acid is. And they're like, that's poison, it eats things. But even just if you're not going super deep in the chemistry half of it, just giving them everyday examples about these things are acids. And you use them, like you're going to yell at me if I say something that's wrong. Like you use lemon juice and it's acidic. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to eat through your desk, but it has that acidic quality. But if you're using another acid base that's stronger, it might be dangerous and you're going to want to wear gloves. And just giving those different examples, so much of vocabulary is giving examples and then putting it into a context. We don't learn vocabulary as individual words. We learn vocabulary as a context. And that goes back to the brain remembers things that make sense and have meaning. So those little vocab words a day dictionaries or notifications you can get will often give you the word and then give you the definition. But if you then, and that makes sense, they always make sense. But if you then don't go and put it into a context and use it, it makes it really hard to remember. So in elementary especially, we're putting things in context for students, we're putting them in sentences, we're giving examples, we're giving not examples. But my caution with giving an example of something that is not a part of your vocabulary is never lead with it. Always lead with what is. And then never ask students, does anyone know what an acid is? Because what happens is you're going to get students who say the wrong answer. And then what happens is everybody remembers the wrong answer and not the correct definition. So lead with what is right and then give examples for what does not fit that category, if that helps at all.
Yeah, that clarified a few things for me.
Yeah, if I could add to that, if you're talking about chemistry in elementary school, or really anything too, you have to meet your student where they are. So like we're talking polymer, they probably know what a net is, or like a spider web. That could be a good example of meeting student where they are.
Yeah, give them a jumping off point. The fancy education word for that is using scaffolding is what it's called. So it's building up students from where they're at, providing them with background knowledge so they'll be able to understand, and then bringing them up to where you need them to be. Like you're building a ladder for them to walk up from where they are, give them a little bit of information to get them to where you need them to be.
Yeah, so that's closer to the question that I wanted to ask is, what are good strategies for finding out what my students' scaffolding is to where we have the same common vocabulary so that I know where to start from? Whether it's in Bell, in professional setting, like...
Okay. Sven, do you have an immediate thought about this?
Ask them.
Yeah, like you can always ask.
It depends on how much time you have to. Like if it's a bell practice that you can reasonably think that your student will return to, you'll treat it differently than if you're giving a 45-minute workshop at an elementary school. It has to do with time, but you can always just ask.
Yeah, you can ask.
That can be tricky too, because you may get one kid who's like, I know what a polymer is.
You get that a lot of dinosaurs in 4th grade.
Yeah, I've made that mistake before where, the bright star in the room knows what's up, but not everyone may. So you kind of gotta find a balance there.
Yeah, if you're going into the elementary school classroom and you have the ability, I would contact the classroom teacher prior to you being there and just ask the teacher, how much have these students have covered in this particular concept? And my guess for chemistry and elementary is basically none because we're teaching math and reading and those are all goals. Um, but that would be a big thing you can do is just always ask the teacher how much they've covered. And then also, there's some excellent children's educational vocabulary building videos that will rapidly and quickly give elementary students a basic foundation for some higher order chemistry concepts in like 3 minutes. I can't think of any off the top of my head because I haven't used a ton of chemistry themed ones, but I do know that they do exist. So if you have access to show a video at the beginning of your presentation that gives a fun, engaging definition and introduction to the vocabulary, then you can use that to build off of. For Bell, I would echo Master Sven and just say, ask them how much they know, and they'll probably tell you, or ask them how much exposure they have. I would not say, it can be hard to ask how much they know because if you know little, you don't know how much you don't know. Is the biggest problem with that. But vocabulary is hard. It's fun. And if you want, you can contact me on Discord or on Facebook, and I can give you some titles to building vocabulary of books I've read. Or we can just chat some more about it when I've had time to give a little bit more cognitive processing power.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
If anyone else in the chat wants to know a fancy academic word, the zone of proximal development is the space where the student and the teacher meet in their knowledge, and the teacher can begin scaffolding.
Yeah, I love ZPDs.
That zone of proximal development.
That's
Yep.
right.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the goal I was taught, the goal with when teaching with a ZPD, that you as a teacher want to teach where the student has like 95% understanding of what you're saying, so that you can bring them up that 5 other percent.
Wow.
Hmm?
Oh, sorry.
You're good. So if you're teaching and the student is only understanding 80% of what you're saying and they're missing 20%, you are teaching at too high of a level. And you can usually, the biggest indication that this is happening is your student is disengaged. They are no longer paying attention to you. Their eyes are elsewhere, their body is elsewhere, their mind is not focused on you. In a typical classroom setting, this results in behavioral problems that you then have to deal with. At a Bell setting, it's usually just the eyes are on the battlefield instead of on you. And that shows your student is disengaged, so checked out, and you are teaching at too high of a level. So that means you need to go back a few steps, figure out what you're missing. Is it a vocabulary that they don't understand? Did you just move too fast? And you need to break it into smaller chunks. Your goal is that they should be understanding 95% of what you're saying. That way you can bring them up that remaining 5%, if that makes any sense. Zone of proximal.
Absolutely.
It's cool. There's lots of education-y books that talk about it.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of what I was going for without having the proper vocabulary for, is at what point, how far do I backtrack before we start to be able to build? And the 95% rule is perfect. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sometimes the answer is a lot. Sometimes you need to backtrack a lot. I know I teach in Idaho, and almost all of our schools are titled as Title I schools. So that means the majority of students attending them get a free or reduced price lunch. So we have a high poverty and then oftentimes a high English as a second language demographic. So what that means is they're not coming into my school building with as much background knowledge as school districts and schools who have higher income families, who just by nature of being able to read more and visit more places and do more things have higher background knowledges about a wide variety of concepts than my students. So sometimes you have to back up a whole lot in teaching to meet student where they're at. It would be like if I was teaching a fighting concept and I walked up to a day new fighter and was teaching them about, how to throw a wrap shot, and they don't know how to throw a straight shot yet. That would be an inappropriate place to meet them. But if I walk up to someone who's been fighting, let's say a year, I should be able to talk to that person and teach them how to throw a wrap shot. They should have enough base knowledge about how to play the game to be able to understand the mechanics behind that and to be able to do it safely. So, meeting students where they're at, it's hard.
Yeah, and in Bell, that also applies to people who have done other combat sports, martial arts, where they have a fundamental body mechanic understanding already. And
Absolutely.
that's where I was kind of trying to tie all this in is, making a point that finding your common vocabulary is very important right up front, and then you figure out where you have to build from after that.
Yeah, absolutely. A day one fighter who has background in amp guard or in martial arts is going to come in with more than a day one fighter who's only ever watched movies with fantasy themes. So definitely establishing that ground.
Well, I'm going to say thank you for the excellent class, and I'm going to bounce out and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Looks like we got about 12 minutes left until satin stitch. So I'm going to go hop onto the Discord and make a post about that because I almost forgot. Don't promote my own classes. Thanks for your input, Sven. That was useful.
Glad I could help.